Time. Welcome. My name is Aoife, and I am a mind body coach. I work with highly sensitive women and I teach them tools how to heal themselves from chronic pain, chronic illness, anxiety, and depression. And today I have a fellow mind body coach, Lucy, also fellow Dubliner. So it's really exciting to have you here today, Lucy. Lucy helps people recover from long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, and chronic pain. Welcome,
Thanks for
Lucy.
having me, Aoife. Yeah, it's lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, great to have you here. I'm excited for our chat. Your internet's still a little bit choppy. You look like uh, but we'll see how it goes. So tell us a little bit about where you were at. So what kind of symptoms you were struggling with, and what was your thought process, like what was going on for you back then?
Yeah, so I actually had two periods of being unwell. So I was unwell with chronic pain as a child, and I had years of chronic pain. I also had food intolerances. So some of the things you've shared before really resonate with me around restricted diets and those sorts of things. And I had other symptoms with unknown causes, like ear pain after ear infections, but the infection was gone, the pain remained. I'd get an injury that wouldn't go away. So that was mostly how my chronic pain manifested. And then in 2020, I got COVID. Somewhat ironically, I got it at a meditation retreat, which turned into long COVID then. And in 2021, it was a lot worse. And I was also diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And that led me to lots of further research and trying many, many different things because I was so unwell, and then eventually finding the mind body approach. So, yeah, so at my worst in 2021, I was in bed most of the day. I could walk to the bathroom, but I couldn't walk downstairs. I needed someone to wash my hair for me. And yeah, like I had to have food brought to my room. I couldn't cognitively, I was really struggling as well. So with chronic fatigue syndrome, it can affect you really badly in terms of your ability to think, ability to have a conversation with someone. I remember downloading Duolingo and practicing a language for only about 2 minutes and getting a migraine afterwards. So for me, a lot of my symptoms were exacerbated by activity. So I had really extreme fatigue. I had orthostatic intolerance. I also had migraines, headaches, and probably other things I can't even think of now. My food intolerances got a lot worse. I was struggling with digesting food properly, and I think fatigue is not the best word to describe chronic fatigue or long COVID, in terms of it's more like your body is shutting down. It's not like fatigue or tiredness in any normal sense of the word. It's it's really severe where you can't function. And yeah, sensitivity to light was something else. So I couldn't go outside without getting a rash on my skin. So 2022, I was a bit better. Luckily, well enough to walk around the house and go for very short walks and socialize a little bit. But it was this time last year actually that I found the mind body approach, and that was what helped me the most. So yeah, so it's kind of crazy to think that was a year ago now.
That's amazing because you're just like you look so bright and healthy and you're smiling and you're happy. And when you're telling me what you were like, I mean, I'm getting flashbacks to what I was like also. And it's just such a terrifying place to be. And your brain isn't working properly and you can't focus on anything and you can't get out of bed, and like not being able to socialize, your life is just kind of stripped from you. It's such a terrifying place to be. And so you were trying the restrictive diets. That was a big thing for me. Like what other things were you trying to heal yourself before you met the mind body teaching?
Yeah, so I was trying so many different things. I had tried many diets even before I got long COVID, and then I was trying other diets for long COVID, like the low histamine diet. I was also getting tests done, like microbiome tests done, and digging into that, I found that I had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and I thought that might be the answer to some of my problems, but it wasn't. And then a parasite was also found, but it turned out to be a parasite that most people have, most of the healthy population, and there's very little known about it. So it was a bit of a minefield trying to research whether that could be causing fatigue or whether it's not causing fatigue or other symptoms. And I did some treatment for both that and the SIBO. Neither of those actually helped. I also tried a number of online programs. So there's a few different online programs for chronic fatigue syndrome, and some of them focus on general healthy lifestyle, pacing, and others are designed more along the lines of brain retraining. And I found those helpful in terms of getting to know other people who are also struggling, but also had an optimistic mindset and wanted to try things to get better. But I didn't find that any of the tools were the answer for me. So I was aware of the link between the mind and the body for quite a long time before even getting long COVID. I read quite a lot of health psychology books. I've studied psychology, and I had actually even read Alan Gordon's book, but I didn't fully resonate with it because for me, the really important piece was the repressed emotions. And John Sarno's book goes into that in more detail. And so when I eventually found his book this time last year, that really struck a different chord with me. Because I think before then, I was open to the idea that emotions could cause symptoms. But from my experience, it wasn't consistent. There were times when I felt really good emotionally. I felt optimistic. I felt motivated. And I tried to do an activity and it wouldn't go well, or I get a lot of symptoms afterwards, which I know now is actually part of recovery as well, even whilst following a mind body approach. But at the time, I think it just didn't kind of fully add up for me. And I think also when you have such severe physical symptoms, it is hard to believe that they could be created by the brain. And sometimes some of these programs, I think, have a very simplistic way of explaining how the brain can cause symptoms. And whilst that helps many people, I think also it is a complex condition, having a mind body condition, and really understanding the science is an important part of it, and having that education part is so important. So once I read John Sarno's book, then I was watching lots of Howard Schubiner talks and reading his book and listening to the Curable podcast. And so having exposure to that was really helpful and really important for me.
Amazing. And like Dr. Sarno, he prescribed his patients knowledge therapy. So these patients that were lined up for surgery or medication or whatever, much to their disgust, they were prescribed a lecture by him. And for many people, that meant that they didn't have to no longer go through with surgery and all the different things. So what you're describing is exactly that. And that's also when I began my journey. there wasn't any coaches. I Googled like mind body coach. I couldn't find anyone. So I just used the knowledge and the information that was out there, just like you did as well. So yeah, I just love what you were sharing, and it is hard to believe that repressed emotions could cause such severe, real dis-ease in the body. And even though I too, like I came from a family of doctors and also holistic, um, I studied holistic therapy, I studied psychology, and I had all these things. I also had a Tibetan meditation practice for a long time. So it was even harder for me to actually believe, because I had done like more psychological inner work than anyone I knew. And
Yeah.
I was sicker than anyone I knew almost. Like I know some people who are really ill as well, but so it was even harder for me when someone would suggest that maybe I was stressed. Um, I'd done more therapy, psychoanalysis, like a psychotherapy. I was like, I've done it all. Like, there's no way that this can be emotional. But what really clicked for me was that because I had studied like anatomy and physiology, and when I heard that kind of like the biology of stress, I like to think it was like, okay, there's an actual biology, there's a biological reaction going on emotionally. So that kind of started to open me up a little bit more to that idea. Um, so tell me, what did you start to discover about yourself then? Because that's really what the journey is. Like you think like for me, it sounded so similar to you. I was like getting to know my intestines. There's like this bacteria and this virus and this parasite. I was like, that's where I was looking for so long. And for some people, it's like X-rays and scans and abnormalities. And for me, I was right in my gut and my, I was coming up with all these different theories. Is it the parasite? Is it the thing? And then it was like a big pivot. Okay, this mind body connection. And from then on in, it was actually just a discovery about myself and what makes me tick, what is causing all this stress in my life. And that is what is causing the stress on my body. So tell us a little bit about what you started to discover.
Yeah, so I think one of the key discoveries for me was some of the mechanisms that I have to not acknowledge emotion. And I thought I was relatively self-reflective, and like you, I've been doing meditation for years and engaging in reading books on psychology, thinking about reflecting on myself in certain ways, but I didn't realize that actually so one of the things I found really helpful was the internal family systems model. And this is looking at different parts of ourselves. And one thing I realized is that I have a part that doesn't like to reflect on emotions, prefers to just, let's keep moving, let's be productive, don't think about emotions and carry on. And so I suppose I still use it now, but during the early phase of my recovery, I used that model a lot to reflect on what part of me is experiencing an emotion right now. And because I have some parts that don't really like to acknowledge emotions, then it's quite a nice model to use, because you're saying, okay, one part of me feels a bit anxious, one part of me feels sad or feels shame or feels guilt. And those other parts, maybe they don't feel it and they don't really want to even acknowledge that it's there, but you can sort of start to separate things out a little bit. And I think if you've grown up in an environment where really the attitude is get on with it, it's good not to have any problem ever, then you do develop parts like this within yourself, or you mirror the people around you who are teaching you that, because it's only natural to do that. And so much of my journey was reflecting on do I have a part that's experiencing an emotion right now? And then over the course of a few months, maybe 3 or 4 months, my symptoms did reduce and I started doing more activities again. I felt like I had bought, once I read the book, I really had bought into the idea. It wasn't too hard for me to get my head around like relating to it. So for me, then it was just making sure that I was checking in with myself and becoming aware of any emotions that might be under the surface or that I might be ignoring. And that's still work I'm doing on myself now, or now that my symptoms have reduced. For the most part, I only get the odd symptom now and again. I still have other coping mechanisms that I use to avoid emotion. And so those are things that I'm paying attention to now as much as I can and trying to work on. And I feel like that's going to be an ongoing journey. But it's really nice because I think within the mind body framework, there's so many different things people can try and different things help different people. And I've learned so much now that there's sort of no going back. Like if I have a symptom, I can't help but look at it for what it is. And naturally, sometimes fear or doubt come up, but it's so much smaller than it would have been before I discovered this approach and before I saw the evidence. So one of the things that I started doing was going for runs, very short runs, but this was after being in bed for 2 years pretty much. And I had had a foot injury for 5 years before I got long COVID and an ankle injury 5 years before that. So I hadn't run in a really long time. But the foot injury, or the foot pain, I should say, was still there. And so when I started, I was testing both the symptoms of fatigue and headache and all of the long COVID symptoms alongside my foot pain symptoms. And it was really compelling evidence for me to see that my foot was okay when I was running, and that beforehand, every time I went for a walk and I thought about my foot pain, I was making the association, I was making that prediction about the pain. I was expecting the pain in my foot. And so there were a few really helpful experiences that helped me really get on board of how powerful this is. And another example is actually with period pain. I had been in so much pain when I got my period and I just couldn't function, couldn't get out of bed. And I also took a prescription painkiller that didn't work. And once I found the mind body approach, I thought, maybe this applies as well. And I started researching, have other people found this helpful for period pain or period symptoms. And the next month, I decided not to take a painkiller and I had no pain and I could function. And it was sort of unbelievable. And it's one of those things that I think from an outside perspective, people might hear and think, oh, that's made up, that can't be real. But when you live through it and realize how powerful this approach can be for you, and having that personal experience really helps you see how powerful it is and how beneficial this approach can be for so many different things.
I love everything you're sharing. And thanks for speaking about doubt as well, actually, because I get on the phone, all the time with people, and they're saying like, oh, I heard that I have to believe 100%, and this is pressure. Like, you're part of the reason you have symptoms in the first place, because all this pressure you're putting on yourself, right, in life, and you have this pressure to believe 100% of the time that this is mind body and it's just in my mind, it's just in my head, and I can fix it. And it's like, no. Like, you can't control the contents of your mind all the time. You're gonna have all different thoughts and emotions. But what you're saying is exactly my experience. I did very quickly, because I had tried literally everything that's out there my whole life, and because of coming from a background of like psychology and biology, I did take to it straight away. However, of course, there's going to be all different when the anxiety, like it's the mind knows what exact symptom you're most scared of, and you'll have the most amount of doubt about, and the insomnia and anxiety for me. So, but what you're saying is, like I like to tell people, you become your very own science experiment, and you just start building evidence. And that's exactly what you're saying. And for me, I had IBS and stomach issues for 30 odd years, and suddenly they were gone for life. Now I haven't had them since. So I'm like, that was a huge piece of scientific evidence for me that what I had, all the things I had been doing before, it completely canceled them out, all the fears and the beliefs I had. And I could, and then, but then it wasn't working. This process wasn't working necessarily on other symptoms, but I had such evidence that it did work. So I just had to keep figuring out, like like what's going on, but always with this same model. Um, so yeah, I love that you were sharing that, and also what you were sharing about the parts. I also love this discovery about yourself. And I've been discovering recently that I have a very strong controller part of me, right? And I mean, duh, like that makes sense now. Like I was like I was had to control my whole environment so I didn't have a flare up. The restrictive diets, a classic like controller. But here I am, I've like, recovered so much and healed so much, but there's always more to grow, and there's always more. That's why we're here. That's why we're alive, having that human experience. And just really realizing that that controller part of me that developed in order to like seek some kind of safety, and to try and find some kind of security in a world and a life that I was feeling completely out of control, um still pops up. And like I went for a hike here in Mallorca, and I signed up to a hike, and then I said yes to drinks afterwards. I said yes to dinner afterwards. I didn't really think wasn't really thinking about it. And then we went on the hike, with all these strangers, which is great crack. But like a few hours later, I'm like, we've been swimming, we've been at a beach, we've been on a hike. I'm like, I'm done. Like, I'm ready to go home. Like, but then I'm like, oh, I signed up to these drinks. Am I actually gonna have to go? And this controller part of me was like freaking out, freaking out. Like, she wants to be in control. She wants to leave when I want to leave. Like she wants everything to be very rigid. And I was like, just watching her. And it was so interesting because I went for the drinks, and I could see that part of me that used to cause symptoms, because I saw them. I was starting to get shivery, and like symptoms were starting to come up because the controller was like, alarm bells, like we're not in control of this entire whole situation. So I went and I leaned in, and I was tired and I wanted to go, and and I was letting it all happen. And then I went for dinner as well. And then the drive home was hours. I didn't get home until 11 p.m. But when I got in the door, I laughed about it with my housemate. I was like, no more group activities. No, but I know now, signing up to group activities, I should ask a bit more questions, or, just because it's not my ideal way to spend like 10 hours. However, it was such a great weekend for me of discovering that I have this controller part of me that's still quite alive and well. But it also comes from a time when I wasn't able to express boundaries, and wasn't okay for me to express my needs or whatever. So the panic and the symptoms that would come up um, were from it's sometime in the past. It's not now. So I was essentially, I was upgrading myself then to 2023, and I'm talking to this controller part. I'm like, oh my God, I understand. You're so scared. I'm like, for one, we're not going to sign up to like this much of an extreme group activity in the future. But also I was like talking to that controller part. I'm like, what do you think we could do differently that would make you feel better about this situation, so you don't have to like freak out? And then the conversation was like, well, you could like ask more questions, like how long is the hike, what time are drinks at, what time is dinner at? How long is it? Like, I didn't ask any of those questions, right? So I was like, oh, that's cool. So like the solution is actually to ask more questions. And actually in the long run, that's going to bring more connection, in life. And it's going to make me feel like safer in situations and in life, and more in control, in a non like, you know, crazy control kind of way, rigid, not in a rigid control kind of way. So yeah, I love this parts work. Another part that I know about myself is like I have a firefighter part. If when it comes to conflict, it's just like it's just like round sounds off the alarms, just put the fire out, put the fire out, put the fire out. And I really can work with that part of me. I had an opportunity recently um to work with that part of me, and again update it to 2023, like, yeah, you're in conflict right now, you're scared, you're freaking out, but it's okay, there's not actually a fire, it's not a real dangerous fire. Like, what will make you feel okay now, and working with that part. So for me, I'm not getting these like gnarly, debilitating, awful symptoms all the time anymore. But I'm more like living from a place where I'm in constant kind of like
Yeah.
discovery mode. I'm on discovery mode, and I'm not hyper vigilant to symptoms and structural things anymore. I'm more vigilant to like myself and my life and these parts of me and how I'm interacting with the world. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
And it's so natural that we have parts that have developed when we were young, and they're trying to help us or protect us in whatever way they know how. And for some people, that might be an anxious part, a part that worries all of the time and worries about getting sicker or worries that it's not going to work. Or for other people, it might be a perfectionist part that really struggles with having a setback and having symptoms again. And it shows up differently for different people. And it's really interesting because I think this work can be really helpful alongside the mind body approach for that self-awareness and also self-compassion, because I've found it really helpful in terms of thinking about these parts in a way that they are trying to help me. This is how they function, this is how they got through life to try and help me in some way. And it's easier to have self-compassion when you think about parts in that way, and when you realize that actually this part that's worrying about the future and that's thinking about these crazy awful scenarios, it's just trying to avoid that happening by thinking about it, or whatever the part is, whatever function that part is using, it's normally just trying to help us. And self-compassion for me like has been really important as well, and in terms of regulating the nervous system and just coming out of my head, because I'm very much a cognitive, overanalyze things, try to fix things, love to research things. So I think it can take time to even recognize you've gone back into those modes again and you need to shift back out. And it's kind of normal, because if you've been doing that for such a long time, and also those parts can be really helpful in many ways, especially researching, whilst it can be unhelpful at times, it also can lead us to finding things that do help, like this approach.
Definitely. And I'm thinking there's also, excuse me, there's also a part, maybe you can help me come up with a name for her, but like it's kind of like a punisher, or like a prison guard, or I don't know, someone who is very like strict. And I've heard people describe TMS as too many shoulds. And so I had a client telling us how she was she was tired. She was lying in bed, but she was just like giving herself such a hard time, right? She was like, but I shouldn't be tired. I should be doing the housework. I should be looking after my child. I should. And I could really relate, because when I was stuck in bed, and I was unable to work, and I was unable to look after myself, and I couldn't get out of bed, I was completely burnt out by the stress of this part of me that was just shouting at me, you should be married, you should have kids, you should have a career, you should get out of bed, you should be making money. Like, it was just like relentlessly all day. I'm like, if you shouted at a puppy or a dog like that all day, that puppy, dog, child, whatever it is, would just be cowering in the corner, just like terrified. So I think a lot of us who are super hard on ourselves, we have this part that's just like, you should be anything but what you are right now. And it really is where the compassion comes in, and it can sound ridiculous to be thinking about compassion when you're talking about very real physical illnesses and conditions. But when you think about the amount of energy, of course I had no energy. The amount of energy, all of my energy was just used up lying there shouting at myself in my head and stressing myself out, and making myself feel awful, just like lying there in bed. So when you can, and also for me, you know, my meditation, I had been practicing compassion. I had been reading the Dalai Lama since like I was a child. Like, it's that. So that's why it was hard for me. Also, there was an aspect that was very hard for me to think that compassion or stress or emotions had anything to do with this, because I had a long list of very serious physical illnesses, and I had like a lifetime of approaching compassion. And but there really is just this missing piece and this link when you can make that connection. So that's why compassion, bringing compassion in, like, to that part of you that is beating yourself up, berating you for being the way that you are, and where you're at. When you can start to soften that, and you go so contracted, right? You're stressed, you're all contracted, right? When you can start to soften and expand into that, then you actually free up so much energy. And then you're like, next thing you know, you're outside going for a short walk. Next thing you know, you're going for a run.
Yeah. And I think there can be a lot of pressure when you're unwell and you maybe want to get back to work, or you don't want to be unwell anymore. I remember kind of setting myself goals like, okay, at the very maximum, I need to be back at work in 2 months' time. And then I was bringing so much stress into every single day, thinking, how am I going to solve this problem to get back to work? There was also a time when I was studying for an exam when I couldn't even sit up. I was trying to continue with like a work-related exam that I had planned to do. And looking back on it now, it was just so ridiculous. There was no way I was going to be able to sit the exam. Like, I couldn't even sit up for 10 minutes, but I was like, I had it in my head, like, I have to do this, I have to keep going, I have to keep working hard. And I think like one of the mindsets that I grew up with was very much like around this idea of, if you are not working, like, you're not trying your best. And if you're not trying your best, then you're being lazy. And trying your best means working really hard every second of the day. And I think, yeah, it's just such an unhealthy way of looking at things. And you can build up negative associations with rest then, and not really even enjoy relaxing and resting and watching TV like someone else might enjoy it, because you have such negative associations with taking a break and with relaxing. And maybe that's also because the nervous system isn't used to being in a regulated, relaxed state as well. But looking back, I think also you can get a lot of answers, or the puzzle pieces start to fit together when you look at your past and think about how you normally used to manage situations, or like what your normal mindset is around just day-to-day life. And then relearning is it's an experience that takes time, and it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. And I think that's in terms of, I think having a flexible approach and a flexible mindset is so important with this work, because it doesn't all come at once. Or if you're thinking about things in terms of black and white, are the symptoms there, are they not? It can be really hard to get to the next step in terms of like recognizing the helpfulness of the signal that is the symptom, or the personality trait, whether it's perfectionism or whether it's something else that's caused that black and white thinking, or the feeling of this is catastrophic, that I've had a setback or that I've had symptoms. It can be really hard. And I think for some people, yeah, it takes a lot of work to try and unlearn those patterns and that mindset.
Definitely. And I love so many things you touched on there. One word in particular is flexible. And I think when you're in that rigid, contracted survival state, you are the opposite of flexible, and everything is forever and catastrophic. And so coming out of fight or flight, literally relaxing and calming and coming out of tunnel vision as well, like literally you start to and biologically more expansive, you do become more flexible. It's like it's going from rigidity, like in a holistic way, to more flexible. And I was noticing it even in myself today, when I love shopping, I love clothes, and I got this bikini uh in the sale, and when I went home with my new bikini, I was so happy. And then I looked on the website and I saw that actually the bikini bottoms on the website were nicer, more my style than the ones I bought. And I can go into that like catastrophic, oh my God, it was in the sale, so I can't exchange it. And I was like cracking up then, because I actually remember a few times when I ordered something online and it's the wrong size. And it might sound so ridiculous to anyone listening, but maybe you have different things, areas in your life where everyone probably has these different areas in their life that because it's essentially it's money. It's like, oh my God, no, I like spent this money, and it's just like, wow, God, there's just, and I was like, this is perfect. This is a great opportunity for you to just get a little bit more relaxed and flexible with this part of you that's showing up like rigid and contracted. So yeah, the rigidity is
And
physical.
yeah, and even that, it's a really good example, because it can be little things that trigger us. And like I probably still have this to some extent, but definitely struggled with decision making in the past. And it was really because it was like, I have to make the right decision. And if I don't make the right decision, it could trigger feelings of guilt. And I hated to feel guilty. So like, even if I chose what I was going to wear, and then I left the house and realized, actually, no, this isn't perfect because of the weather, or because of, like these shoes are starting to hurt me. And I would beat myself up, or I would feel this level of guilt that was just so out of proportion for the situation. But it wasn't because of the trivial fact that I'd worn the wrong shoes. It was more so because I felt it was so important to make right decisions, because I felt so much like I had to rely on myself, and that meant much more than the shoes themselves. It was like, I have to be able to make good decisions because I need to rely on myself. So it's more of a deeper meaning behind all of it. And yeah, and it takes, it's helpful when these examples come up as well, just because you can, they're interesting. And if you come with an attitude of curiosity and interest, you can learn more, and there's always more to learn, which I think is a positive thing.
Totally. And like as you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, it's perfectionism for me. It's like, no, I have to get the exact right bikini. It all has to be perfect. And I also like I could tell you so many examples of this showing up in my life, but I also had it very extremely with my hair as well. And I would go to the hairdresser and I would be bawling, crying afterwards because it's just the wrong shade of blonde. Like it's like such a like Barbie problem. But and I've been practicing now like the past year. I didn't get my hair done. I didn't like it. Didn't like how I was looking or whatever, but I was like just leaning into how you what's it like to not be have everything so rigid and perfect and exactly how you want it to be. Can you feel okay? Can you find something else to rely on? Because when you are relying on everything looking or you know for other people it might be different things that they need to have in place to feel
Yeah.
good, to feel okay. That is such a like the wind blows strong and on those in those circumstances because all it takes is the wrong like the wind to blow in another direction and then you're off and it does feel catastrophic because you've been putting all your energy into that keeping you feeling safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it takes time for these things to for us to even become fully aware of our own mechanisms, and then for them to slowly shift over time. And it requires a sort of an interest in doing that self-exploration as well. And I think that's, some people will ask me, how long did it take you to recover? Have you fully recovered? Or they wanted an exact time scale. And actually, I think if you can engage in this work, thinking of it as a lifelong process, it's much more helpful, because also that means that maybe it's not that you're expecting to have symptoms again in the sense of predicting them, but you're not surprised if they do come up again, because you're thinking, oh, well, this is part of the process. Maybe I need to pay attention to something. Maybe I need to pay attention to an emotion. Maybe there's a personality characteristic that's become too controlling or too uptight, and reflecting on that can be helpful. And yeah, and like life isn't easy for anyone. I think as a human, like we can never all get it perfect and feel fully aligned and fully like liberated in everything. So there's always new ways to look at things, and also yeah, self-reflection to be done.
Definitely. And I know like it can be really, especially if you're in a really bad way with your symptoms, it probably sounds like very doom and gloom to think this is a lifelong journey and like
Yeah.
symptoms will probably always be there, but you will feel so much better and you can feel better quite fast. Maybe
Yeah.
not the like recovered symptom free kind of idea that you might like have in your head as a destination, but you can start to feel better. Um and um and yeah, like becoming symptom free is just not the destination at all.
Yeah.
But I know when you're in the absolute depths of it, that's all you can think about and that's all you want, right? But it's a lifelong journey of just like getting your life back, like getting your life back, getting your joy back, getting your relationships, finding happiness, connecting to your purpose, like getting all the things that the symptoms are currently stealing from you, all
Yeah.
the things, the light in your eyes, the like blood in your face, the wind in your hair, like all these things that the symptoms are currently taking from you. It's about getting all of those things back, and then the symptoms just become like whatever, like they just become so not that interesting anymore unless they're bringing an important message, and then they're interesting, but apart from that they're just not so interesting anymore. And I don't know how I would have responded if you told me that in 2017. I might have like thrown something at you. I don't know. But like but I can go back to that version of me in 2017 and let her know that like shit gets way better. Um, you know.
I think also even for some people when they still have symptoms, but they really can relate to this approach and trust that it's going to work for them, even that alone can radically shift your quality of life. And because so much of the challenge is the uncertainty, the fear associated with the uncertainty, and everything that goes with that, you know, the doctor visits, the trying things and them not working, the feeling let down, the feeling misunderstood. You know, it's really hard to be in a place with no answers. And as you said before, it's like you don't need to uh fully relate to it or fully believe in this approach straight away. Like, having doubt is a normal part of the process, and it's something you can work through, and with time that trust can build. And it's, yeah, I think it's, there's a lot there's a lot to be said for just knowing that things can get better and trusting and having the hope that this can work for you, and that if one specific technique doesn't help, then maybe it just needs to be adjusted, or maybe a different technique will help. There's always another way, and there's always a different way of looking at things. It's not a one size fits all. And I tell myself that now, even like if I ever try a particular technique that's worked for me in the past and it doesn't work now, I'll find something else. It'll be okay. There'll be something else there's lots of different coaches with different perspectives, different ways of looking at things, different tools. And I think that's a really positive thing, because it means that there are many things to try. And I think the information lands differently for different people at different times in their life. Like you were saying as well, like if I come across the mind body approach, or someone told me this is a journey and you'll have to be learning your whole life about this, I could have felt really, really dismissed when I was really unwell. And even then people did tell me, oh, this is more of an emotional or brain related thing. And I felt, you know, I wasn't in the right headspace to comprehend it. And I didn't have the right information. I didn't have the books that fully explained it. And therefore, I just felt misunderstood, dismissed. And yeah, it's hard when you're in that place to be open to things. And I think for some people it happens really quickly, and for others it's more like, you know, stepping stones. They might have some level of interest and trust that this might be relevant to them, but they need to take a few more steps to be fully engaged in the process in a way that's going to help them fully recover.
I love what you shared. I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing that. So yeah, time is nearly up and it's been so much fun chatting with you. I'm excited. We should totally hang out when I'm back in Ireland.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience. Yeah, I've just gotten so much out of this call together. And I'll leave all of your information in the description so people can get in touch with you. I know you're on YouTube, so they can follow you on YouTube also. So yeah, is there anything you want to say to people before we end?
Well, I suppose just thanks for having me. And I suppose in terms of people who are at the start of this journey or in the middle of the journey or struggling, yeah, just attend to the parts of you that feel frustrated with the process and be kind to them, or acknowledge that you're feeling frustrated with it, or acknowledge that it's hard to be open to some of these ideas, because sometimes it's just frustrating to be in a place of not being well, and And part of this work is paying attention to how you feel. And even though sometimes it's uncomfortable to do that, it can also help you feel a bit better to just notice, okay, I feel really frustrated that I'm in this situation. Yeah, and thanks for having me. I love all of your other interviews. I'm always have them on in the background. I'm listening to speaking to other people, and I find the conversations really interesting and helpful. So yeah, thanks for sharing with everyone.
Amazing. Thanks for tuning in. And we will totally chat again.
Take care.